Ok, en el video anterior, bueno, ahorita vamos a repasar todo lo que hemos hecho. Entonces, empecemos. Ok, acabo de despertar la computadora, entonces va a estar un poco lenta. Tengo sueño. Siento pesado los ojos. Ok. Ok, aquí tenemos el personaje. Entonces, la cámara lo sigue, se centra, ya tiene las animaciones para los 4 lados, camino izquierda, derecha, arriba, abajo, diagonal. No se mueve tan rápido, puede tirar espadazos, podemos quebrar jarrones, chocamos con el entorno, ya nos rotamos de forma, podemos leer rótulos. Hace transición, podemos desplegar un mensaje. Y ya tenemos un enemigo que nos sigue. Salimos de radio, a seguirnos. Y ya podemos también golpearlo. Golpearlo y él se hace para atrás. Y nos valdría aún para empujarlo, porque no podemos empujar. ¡Ey! Se fue. Bueno, todas esas variaciones hace falta un ver. Entonces, ahí vamos a ver hurtboxes. Supongo que esto es que vamos a tener nuestra sangre, nuestra vida, y se nos va a reducir cada vez que nos pegue. Entonces,
Alright, so where we left off, we have our player. When they walk into their enemy is going to come after them. And we added a state machine so that we can knock back the enemy and have it trace the enemy's current state. So for example, if it's in walk, if it's in idle, if it's in stagger, attack, and so on and so forth. So today what we're going to do is we're going to make it so that our player can't just walk into our enemy like this without themselves being knocked back. So let's get started. First thing I want to do is go to my player here. And I don't know why I put the knockback script on the player themselves when I should have put it on the actual hitboxes. So I'm going to copy this component off of the player. I'm going to paste it onto the hitboxes. To do that, I'm going to go to my knockback script on my player object.
Ok, pero como es lo de herencia, entonces supongo que como es el padre, los de abajo reciben. Ok, pero bueno, vamos a hacer lo que dice.
I'm going to hit the gear. I'm going to copy this component, and then I'm going to remove the component. Then I'm going to go to my hitboxes, and I'm going to paste component as new. Now you'll notice that we also have a player hit script here. I don't know why I made 2 of these. I made a player hit and knockback that have most of the same functionality. Just one is for the pot and one is for the enemy. So I'm going to remove the player hit script. We're going to move its functionality onto the player. Next thing I want to do is I want to define an actual hurt box for the player. So right now the player...
Ok, primero hagamos eso. Entonces vino él y agarró el player. Y al player le quitó esto. Aquí le puso copy component y le dio remove component. Y se los asignó a todos estos. Le puso aquí paste component as new. Y lo que hizo fue se lo quitó. Ay.
Knockback that have most of the same functionality. Just one is for the pot and one is for the enemy. So I'm going to remove the player hit script. We're going to move its functionality onto the player. Next next thing I want to do is I want to define an actual hurt box for the player. So right now the player has a box collider 2D, which is being used for collision. I'm going to add another one that I'm going to use for determining hits. So this one is going to be a little bit smaller than our player. So I added a box collider 2D, edit collider. I'm going to make this
Ok, ahora tiene dos box colliders, pero ¿cómo sé cuál? Cuando lo mando a llamar, ¿cuál es cuál? Ok, este lo voy a deshabilitar por mientras porque no lo puse otra vez. Entonces aquí en player vino él y aquí está.
about like that, and over here. So you want to make it a little bit smaller than your player so that your game feels more fair for your people who are playing it. If you have it the exact size of your player, it's going to seem unfair, despite the fact that it won't be. And then for your enemy, we're going to do the same thing. Pretend you didn't see that. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to add a box collider 2D, and this one we're going to make about the size of the enemy, maybe even a little bit bigger. It's always good to err on the side of your player. As far as things like this go. So there we go. There we go. And I'm just going to leave the collision one alone. The other thing I want to make sure I do is mark both of these as triggers so that they don't interfere with collisions. So they're both triggers. All right, cool. Now let's get into the programming here. So we're going to open up two scripts. One is player hit, and the other is the knockback script. So in player hit, I want to find my on-trigger enter 2D. I'm going to copy this. Then I'm going to go into my knockback script. And where we're already doing on-trigger enter 2D, I'm just going to add
tag. Entonces aquí en el knockback. If. Si es breakable. Entonces si este es Sí. Repair. Arrow. Este es sí. Repair enemigo.
That bit of code that I just copied. I need to change this from other.compare tag to other.gameObject. .compare tag. And then I'm going to save my script. And let's make sure this still works. So if I go back into Unity and hit play, I should still be able to break the pot. And I should still be able to knock the enemy back. Cool. So I haven't changed any functionality yet. Now, what I want to happen is I want, when the player overlaps the enemy,
¿Está? Perfecto. Pucha. Ok.
for the enemy to knock the player back. So to do that, I need to change this from other.compare tag to other.gameObject. .compare tag. And then I'm going to save my script. And let's make sure this still works. So if I go back into Unity and hit play, I should still be able to break the pot. And I should still be able to knock the enemy back. Cool. So I haven't changed any functionality yet. Now, what I want to have...
Ok, vamos a ver, tal vez sea mucho que le estoy poniendo de power.
Aquí está, Leonel, tu cosito.
Pásamelo. Miren, ahí el log quedó en stagger, no regresó a... Bueno, hay una box ahí, pero vamos.
happen is I want, when the player overlaps the enemy, for the enemy to knock the player back. So to do that, I'm going to go to my log, and I'm going to add a knockback script to it. But in order for this to work, we're going to have to do a few more things to the code to make sure that we can use that same script for both the player and the enemy. I'm going to give a relatively low thrust, say 2. And
Entonces vamos a agregar un knockback al log.
I'm going to leave the knockback time at 0.2 seconds.
No.
I'm going to go back into my knockback script. So if other.gameObject.compare tag enemy, I'm going to say if it's enemy or if it's player. So or other other.gameObject.compare tag, and the tag for the player is going to be capital P player. I believe I've already used that, but let's make sure. So in Unity, player, and the tag for the player is capital P player. So cool. So we're going to do, I'm going to call this, instead of enemy, I'm going to call it hit. So it's the object that we're hitting. And then hit. So we're going to check to see if it's a rigid body. This works for both the enemy and the player. If hit isn't null, we're going to say...
Pero esto hace mucho cambiarlo. Ok, este es para hacer un knockback también para el jugador, pero... Casi puede que no quisiera un knockback para el jugador. Vamos a lo siguiente. Enemy. Quitamos este other. Y vamos a hacer algo. Vamos a comentarlo todo esto. Control C. Código para rebote sobre código para rebote o other punto punto compare tag player ay qué bruto al final. Entonces body hit y hit.
We're going to come back to that in just a second. This is good.
Hit.
Going to be hit. And this is going to be hit. And this is going to be hit. And then I'm going to get rid of that debug statement that may or may not have been added on camera. Okay, cool. So most of this code applies to both the player and the enemy. So this one only applies to the enemy. This applies to both. This applies to both. This applies to both. And then this start coroutine can apply to both as well. So what I want to do is I want to have it split at this point and then have some of these things happen for the enemy and some of them happen for the player. So if hit isn't null, I'm going to now check the tag. So if other.gameObject.compare tag enemy. So if it's the enemy, I'm going to put it into the stagger state. So I'm going to cut that, paste it here, and I don't need to do anything. any of this differently. So otherwise, like for both of them, it's going to do this. Now in my not coroutine, I'm going to actually move this from where it currently is. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to move it into the enemy script itself, because I'm going to have a knockback on all of my enemies. So
No public.
in the enemy script, get rid of my start, my update methods. I'm going to paste that enumerator, and this is going to require two arguments. One, I'm going to call this rigid body 2D. I'm going to call it, say, my rigid body, and then a float, which is knock time. So instead of this being enemy, it's my rigid body. Instead of this being velocity, or instead of it being enemy, it's my rigid body. And then this is my rigid body. And I don't actually need to do this get component stuff because the current state is already here. Okay, cool. So that's the enemy version of it. Now I'm going to make a small method that's going to call that coroutine. This is going to be a public void knock, and this is going to require those two arguments as well. So rigid body 2D, my rigid body, and then float knock time. And then the only thing this is going to do is start that coroutine. Start coroutine, not co, and I'm going to pass in my rigid body and knock time. All right.
Y ahora voy a llamar a knock. Entonces aquí en knockback veremos knock. Nada, lleva hit y lleva not. Ah, creo que era directo. No.
So what I want to do here is in my knockback script, instead of starting this coroutine, I'm going to, if the other is enemy, call that on the enemy. So I'm going to say other dot get component enemy. knock. And I'm going to pass in other and knock time. So that,
No, hit.
oh, it needs to be the rigid body. And I call it the rigid body hit. There we go. So I'm letting that object monitor its own knockback instead of being monitored by something else. So I'm going to save that. Oh yeah, and then I don't want it to get staggered again if it's already staggered. So in enemy, I'm going to say if my rigid body isn't null and current state is not equal to enemy state dot stagger. So that we're not staggering something that's already staggered and like multiplying the forces on them. All right, cool. Now we're going to do something similar for the player. So I'm going to put this in the movement coroutine because that's where the state machine is. Here, I'm going to add a new state, which is stagger, and do coroutine because that's where the state machine is. Here, I'm going to add a new state, which is stagger, and current state is not attack, and let me put this on another line. So it's easier to read. Current state is not play. Player state dot stagger. So if we're not staggered, then we can attack. And then if we're in walk, then we can do that. Okay. That seems right. And now I'm going to add that not coroutine. This isn't going to be enemy anymore. It's going to be my rigid body.
Bueno, creo que vamos a ver aquí.
And it's going to have float knock time. So my rigid body, and I actually don't need to do this as an argument at all because my rigid body is already something that's determined in here. And then I'm going to change my current state to player state. Idle. Did I not call it idle? Oh, I guess I don't have an idle state. So I'll add that. Alright, cool. And now I need something to start that coroutine. So I'm going to do public. My current state to player state. Dot idle. Did I not call it idle? Oh, I guess I don't have an idle state. So I'll add that. Alright, cool. And now I need something to start that coroutine. So I'm going to do public void knock. And then this is only going to take in a time. So float knock time and then start coroutine. I feel like I'm going through this really, really fast. Knock co knock time. All right. So the whole point of that is that we're not doing this coroutine in the knockback anymore. Instead, we're letting each object determine its own knockback on its own. So rather than knock something back through the player and having to have the player keep track of how much something else is knocked back, each object is going to keep track of itself, which makes more sense. And then I need to invoke it in the player. So if other.gameObject.compare tag player, and then we're going to set its current state. So we're going to do hit.getComponent, and we want to get the player movement component. We want to set the current state to player state dot stagger, and then we want to initiate the knockback. So we'll do other dot get component player movement dot knock, and we'll send in the knock time. Okay, and it also seems right for me to do that after I've done all the physics stuff. So I'm going to grab those 3 lines and put them first. So, all right, that's a lot of coding without testing anything. I almost certainly broke something. So let's just trace ourselves here. So the knockback, which is on everything that's going to knock something else back or do something, we have a trigger enter 2D. If it's a breakable thing, we're going to do this. If it's an enemy or a player, we're going to get the rigid body. If the rigid body isn't null, we're going to calculate the difference. We're going to multiply the difference by the thrust. We're going to add force to that object. If it's an enemy, we're going to put its state into stagger and then start their knockback coroutine on themselves. If it's a player, we're going to set their state to stagger and then start the player's knockback thingy thing on itself. So let's save this and let's see how much I broke. Not what I broke, how much I broke. All right, so all right, so that still works. Holy cow. All right, well that was a heck of a lot of thrust.
Ok, pues quiero ver las states. Este es el player.
Alright, so that still works. Holy cow. Alright, well that was a heck of a lot of thrust. I wonder if that's because the player has way too much thrust on their knockback. Let's check here. Let's make this like 2. And then let's also look at the log to make sure it's initiating its... Oh, that's what I need to do. Okay, cool. So, in my enemy, when my knock coroutine is over, after I set the state to idle, I'm also going to set the rigid body velocity to vector 2.0. I'm going to do the same thing to my player here. Player movement. My rigid body dot velocity equals vector 2.0. Okay, I think that was it. Let's give this a try. So if I hit play, okay, sweet. So if I go, it's like floating. Alright, what happens if I look at my log here? He's still in this stagger state. How long do I have stagger set for? 0.2? It means that enemy Oh no. Okay. Hold on, I'll be right back. Alright, I'm not gonna lie. I'm actually surprised I didn't break more than I did. The first problem, which I didn't even show you, if our player walks into our enemy, I am stuck and cannot control. The second problem is if our player hits our enemy, they're stuck infinitely being staggered, and since they are essentially like, like a puck on an air hockey table, they're just going to go forever until they hit something. So let's fix these two problems. The first one's really easy. If we go into our player movement script, the reason I wasn't able to walk is because I reset the state to idle, but I didn't check for state idle. So in our update method here, where we check if player state is walk, we're going to add or current state is equal to player state. .idle. So that's going to fix the first issue. And then if I go into my enemy script, I want to remove the check to see if the current state is stagger, because it was only going into here if the current state was not stagger. So since I changed the state to stagger, it was never being changed back to idle. So I'm going to save this, go into Unity here, and let's give this a try. So, alright, yeah, okay, cool. So we're going to walk over, So our enemy's giving our player just a teeny tiny tap just to knock them back. It's probably too low. Let's try like 4. I'm a big fan of doubling stuff if you don't like it. That's better. And then there's our little tap to our enemy. We're not giving them too much force like we were at the beginning. So our enemy's giving our player. Go into Unity here. And let's give this a try. So, alright. Yeah, okay, cool. So we're going to walk over. So our enemy's giving our player just a teeny tiny tap just to knock them back. It's probably too low. Let's try like 4. I'm a big fan of doubling stuff if you don't like it. That's better. And then there's our little tap to our enemy. We're not giving them too much force like we were at the beginning. So, and then we can still get out of their range. They'll go back to sleep. We can still break pots. Oh, hey. That pot broke right when we walked over it. Let's make a really quick change here. So in our not...
Este video vamos a terminarlo ahorita, pero es todo por hoy. Vamos.